Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, everybody. Today I wanted to just go over a game or two that I have played in the Double-Mujannah to illustrate some of the points that I made in my previous lecture. For this first game, I want to talk about why white should attack traditionally on the Shah side rather than the Ferzan side. So this is a game that I played against one lack. This was, and to be very fair to my opponent, this was possibly his first game of Shatranj. One lack is very strong. He's a national master. Well, I guess it wasn't his very first game because he had a rating of 1750, but I would just say, his strength is much higher than I think what this game indicates. But anyway, we just opened with a Double-Mujannah. If you notice the point that I made the other day about move order, traditionally white would have played his pawn up to c4 first, but nowadays typically the Double-Mujannah is seen with 4 pawns. So at this point, I led with f4, inviting my opponent to play a Double-Mujannah. If black had not played a Double-Mujannah and instead played something like e5, my plan was to continue with g3, and then I would play e4, snake the furs up to e3, and just play this sort of tabia that's fairly common in today's more modern games. So that plan was on the table for me, but note I could have led with e4 if I wanted, although typically I find if I'm playing a player who might be copying my strategy, often black actually does very well with a copycat strategy in this opening. And I thought probably my strategic abilities and knowledge of the game would be better suited to play for a win in a Double-Mujannah. Something that's maybe a little bit less based on calculation and more has to do with the strategies that you either know or you don't know. So we reach a Double-Mujannah. I play rook to b1, classic move. Okay, and here my opponent played rook to g8. This is absolutely fine if black is planning to continue by swinging the rook over to the Shah side. But as we'll see, that was not the plan that my opponent came up with. So I played rook to g1. So note that it's also possible for white to play pawn to h3 and swing the rook over this way. And there's some sense in which white is saving a tempo doing that or getting in this extra move h3. When trying to figure out whether or not you want to try to save that tempo, the main things that you want to consider, so one, how likely is it that black is going to try for this break? Because if black tries for this break, you're probably better off with the pawn on h2. That way, when g4 comes, it won't break up your entire pawn structure. And also, you want to have this pawn on h2 so that in the event that black plays g takes f4, white plays g takes f4, you want to be able to firmly cement your furs on g3. Now, if you, for whatever reason, know that your opponent isn't going to go for that strategy or you don't think that he will, then maybe h3 is good and that it saves you some time. The other strategic consideration is whether or not you're going to need to develop your elephant out this way. Typically, it's good to be able to develop the elephant to h3 if you think that black is going to be playing e5 in the center. So if you have some indication that black might be trying a rook lift this way, with the idea towards an e5 break. Then you want to be able to play bishop h3 and bring your knight to h4 and put pressure on this pawn and try to exchange it for the elephant. You'll win material that way, or you'll force black to bring his knight back to e7 to try to guard f5. In which case you've broken the connection between black's rooks, and particularly if black has put a rook on e7, then knight to e7 isn't even an option anymore. So those are the strategic considerations that you want to think about. The theory in the 800s and 900s AD was certainly that white should hold off and not play h3, and instead should play rook to g1 here. I think it's actually a very close question because there is some benefit to playing h3. White will get the chance at some point maybe to play g4, and then also it's just a useful move to guard the g4 square. So I think it's actually a close call. But in this game I played rook g1, which is the classical traditional main line. So rook g2, black does start on this rook maneuver to counter on the Shah side, but after I played a3, black then plays h6 with the idea to continue with g5. So I just played pawn to b4, open the game up. Black played pawn to g5, but you'll see that this is entirely too late here. I now swing the rook over so that I'm able to recapture with g takes f4, and I'm not suffering from this pin. Black played g4, and it's hard to fault him for doing so, because if you play g takes f4, I just play g takes f4, and I have guarded everything, and I can run this furs up to g3 at the right moment. Maybe black should play this anyway, with the idea of trying to meet Furzan to f2 with rook g2. Of course, white isn't really worried about this. White will play the Furzan on to g3 anyway. Maybe white will even have time to play rook b3, preventing the trade of rooks, and then when the Furzan comes here, there might be an opportunity to run the king over to f1 and even trap this rook behind enemy lines. That's not as far-fetched as you might think at first. It certainly happens. So I think probably black should play g takes f4, but you know, and just make do with the counterplay that he has. White can obviously also, after g takes, white can play king e2 and king f2, and really just stop the funny business on the g file altogether, or just king e2 and Furzan to f2, so that when black plays rook to g2, there's actually nothing further for this rook to do. White will just play bishop to h3 and king to f1 and kick the rook out. So g takes f4, I think, is better for black than what happened in the game. It gets black at least a little bit of counterplay. But you know, as it happened, okay, black plays pawn to g4. I brought the knight to d2. It's also possible to go to h4 with the idea of ganging up on this pawn at some point. But I like the idea of bringing the knight back to d2, where it will be able to make inroads on this side of the board. Essentially, my goal when I'm playing white against the structure for black is I'm going to try to hold the entire Furzan side with literally just the Furzan and maybe the king. And if I can entirely hold down the side that way, then I will have a massive advantage on the Shah side. So black plays pawn to h5, natural follow-up, Fuzand f2. I'm continuing my plan of just holding the entire Fuzand side down. Black understandably tries to get some counterplay on the h-file, but now I have the opportunity to open up the Shah side. So b takes c5, d takes c5 is forced because of the pin on b8. Never good for black to be losing a center pawn this way. Now pawn to e4. So now that I have established dominance on this side of the board, I want to open up a second front, so to speak, and the weak f5 pawn, and the center appears to be my best place to do so. You'll note that something like pawn to a4 is very ill-advised here. The black elephant can simply jump into b4, completely gumming up the works. Sensing that I've already made most of the progress that I can on this side of the board, I go for the center. It's probably possible to play knight a4, threatening to take on c5. Black could probably meet this with, say, knight to d7. I didn't think that it was as threatening as this direct march on the center. So I'm opening up a second front. Black senses that things are going wrong on the Shah side. He needs to get his other rook into play. And this gives me the opportunity to activate the elephant. I'm threatening to take on c5, rook bd7. Notice this structure is often very good for white because black is not threatening anything on d3. This elephant is perfectly happy to just sit here and defend d3 all day. And that's a little bit different than what you would see in modern chess. So now I'm able to push past. I'm sure other approaches are possible, but this looked like the most direct way. White now has a tremendous space advantage. I go knight a4, now I'm threatening this pawn. Black is running out of options very fast. The counterplay on the Fuzand side comes, but it's at this point entirely insignificant. I'm just crashing through on the Shah side. Now I've achieved this structure, and black has no way to continue on the Shah side. I just activate my pieces on the Shah side, and now the final blows are coming. I can just march on the center. I'm threatening the black king, pawn to d5. At this point, black is completely lost, and black at this point forfeited on time. So just to take a look at this, I think the key points in the game, really, the big one for black was embarking on this plan here on move 15 with pawn to g5. This really allowed me to come in, get black's pawn off of the center, and then I could push in the center myself and create a weakness. So this has been just a quick game to illustrate the difference between the two sides of the board, and hopefully that concept is clearer now.